On New Year's Eve of 2017, a cruel and terrible atrocity occurred in the home of a New Jersey family. When police arrived, it would turn out to be one of the worst crime scenes they had ever come across. This is the case of Scott Kologi. Hello, friend, and welcome to High Time Crime. My name's Joel, and on here I specialize in true crime and also avoiding bridge tolls by any means possible. These suckers aren't getting a nickel out of me. But anyways, today we're going over the case of Scott Kologi, a 16-year-old boy who turned what was supposed to be a fun and joyful holiday into a complete nightmare. For our story, we're heading to Long Branch, New Jersey. Long Branch is a beachside city in Monmouth County and has a population of around 32,000 people. Because of its location on the Jersey Shore and proximity to the ocean, it's generally known as being a popular destination for fun, relaxation, and recreation. And so naturally, if you ever find yourself here, there's plenty of cool things to do. You could take a stroll on the Long Branch Boardwalk with arcades, shops, and food. You could visit one of the many beaches where sandcastles are formed, and sunscreen is a wise option. You could take a trip to an Italian restaurant and indulge yourself in some delicious food. You could even get trapped in an escape room for 60 minutes at a place called Escape the Puzzle, which, to be honest with you, reminds me of what I do every single day at my own house for free. But despite how fun all of those things sound, none of them are the reason as to why we're in Long Branch today. Scott Kologi was born on September 1st of 2001 in New Jersey. The makeup of his family included his father Stephen, his mother Linda, and 3 adult siblings. Altogether, with the exception of one of the siblings, the entire family lived in a normal duplex home in Long Branch. According to documents, Stephen Kologi was a mailman, while his wife Linda collected unemployment insurance. Meanwhile, Scott's older sister, Brittany, was an 18-year-old college student studying health sciences. Most of the time, she was living on campus, but during the events of this story, she had returned home for winter break. It's unclear what Scott's older brothers did, but we do know one of them was named Stephen Jr. and in his early 20s. The other brother is unidentified and didn't live in the home. Now, as for Scott himself, while not much is known about his early life, by the age of 16, he had been diagnosed with autism and early signs of schizophrenia. Because of this, he attended a different school than his siblings did, and he needed help with certain daily activities. Also, he was known to have slept in his parents' bed most of the time, and he also didn't have a driver's license. But it is clear that he knew right from wrong, and as you'll see later in a clip, he was really quite articulate. Overall, Scott was seen as being a pretty happy person to the outside world. He was always smiling and laughing, and although he didn't have many friends, he attended his father's softball games and family events. So with this happy demeanor, it's no surprise friends and neighbors later said that they never suspected what would happen. But really, the truth was that underneath the surface, things were much different than they appeared. Evidently, Scott's mental issues bothered him more than he let on. And behind closed doors, he requested to his mother Linda that he start going to therapy. Apparently, she was quite hesitant about the idea though, and when he asked, she replied, "No, because they'll take you away from me. And do you really want to go to the loony bin?" On top of that, there was definitely a buildup of the terrible atrocity he would soon commit. In the weeks and months before December of 2017, Scott had explicitly made comments about killing his family members to none other than his family members themselves. In fact, in Scott's immediate family, it was apparently an open secret that Scott had homicidal thoughts. One person that overheard these was his aunt, who lived in the family's basement for a period of time. For the sake of privacy, we'll call her Martha. Now, according to Martha, Scott claimed he didn't want to hurt anybody, but he said someday he might have to. She also said that one time while they were playing a board game together, he pointed at her with a piece that looked like a revolver and told her he was going to kill her. Additionally, Scott's parents were fully aware of his behavior, but his mother Linda did her best to keep the outside world in the dark. Evidently because, like we already mentioned, she was afraid that if the authorities knew, they would take her son away from her. But before long, Scott's aunt recognized the seriousness of the statements he was making, and she began urging her sister to get him some help. In response to this, Linda threatened to kick Martha out of the family's home if she told anyone. And within no time, even though she didn't tell anyone, Martha was no longer living in the family's basement. Additionally, Scott's grandfather, whose name is Adrian, claimed that all Scott talked about was killing people. And like Martha, he too complained about this to both of Scott's parents. But when Scott was made aware that his grandfather told them, he got angry at Adrian for ratting him out. Now, as for why Scott began feeling the way he did about his family, though, we may truly never know. It might be worth mentioning that he and his family had gone through some seriously bad financial struggles throughout his life, but other than that, they were just really loving and compassionate. Every morning, Scott's mother laid out his clothes for him and made food specifically for his picky tastes. Overall, Linda was just very protective of him. But before long, Scott Kologi was planning to do something awful to not only her, but to the rest of his family as well. In the months before December of 2017, Scott was going on the internet looking up tutorials on how to use his brother's AK-47, and he was becoming practically infatuated with the weapon. Every day he would take it out and play with it. And so this access to a deadly firearm, along with increasingly bad thoughts, would turn out to be a deadly combination. After years of dealing with mental issues, Scott Kologi was officially about to snap. So on the day of December 31st of 2017, the Kologi family was looking forward to a happy, fun-filled holiday. The spirits were high in the home, and by all accounts, it seemed like just another New Year's Eve. But meanwhile, Scott Kologi, the youngest member of the family, had spent much of the day in his room researching a that occurred in London about 6 months prior. And now, less than an hour before the ball was about to drop in New York City, Scott had returned to his room after going downstairs for a bit, and once again, he started thinking about murder. The difference between this time and other times is that this time he was finally going to go through with it. Not only did he have his brother's AK-47 loaded and ready to go, but he was wearing sunglasses and a leather jacket reminiscent of the Terminator. And in order to protect his ears from the sound of the rifle firing, he even had earplugs in. Now, as for the people partying downstairs, well, these included Scott's mother, Linda, his father, Stephen, his sister, Brittany, his brother, Stephen Jr., his grandfather, Adrian Kologi, and his grandmother, Mary Scholes. Apparently, Mary wasn't technically Scott's grandmother per se, but he did call her his grandmother because she had been Adrian's partner for many years. Anyway, around 11 a.m. at night, Scott was standing in his room with the lights off, waiting for his mother Linda to come up with party favors and tell him to join the rest of the party downstairs. So when she finally did that, he shot the rifle he was holding and killed her instantly. Next, his father Stephen came to the room to figure out what all the commotion was about. And likewise, Scott shot and killed him too. After that, Scott proceeded to walk downstairs with the loaded rifle still in his hands, and then, aiming the sight at his grandmother, Mary, he fired at her and killed her too. Finally, he walked up to his sister Brittany, who was sitting in a chair at the kitchen table. He then pulled the trigger and took the life of his own sibling. After this, however, Scott claims to have woken up from a daze when he saw the reaction from his grandfather, Adrian, after witnessing the death of his long-term partner, Mary. Pretty quickly, Adrian had fallen down to his knees and broken down at the sight of his loved one. And so after Scott witnessed this, he spared his grandfather and brother and went back to his room to wait for the police to show up. And when the authorities did arrive, it was a gruesome sight. All 4 people were pronounced dead at the scene. 4 people who had been viciously murdered at the hands of their own family member. But when police arrested Scott Kologi, he demonstrated a very calm and casual demeanor despite having just committed such a terrible atrocity. Pretty soon, they interviewed him as part of standard procedure. And, well, here's a few minutes of that. And by the way, I have to admit, it's pretty unsettling.
I know they're all, deceased.
How do you know that?
Even though it felt like I wasn't doing this physically, I was still able to see everything, and I would see them moving, and I just kept firing until they stopped moving, and I would aim at the head and whatnot.
So you were aiming at their heads?
Yeah, and when I saw they were still moving, because even though I was in this type of thing, I just didn't want them to be in pain at the same time.
All right, let me rewind a little bit. So upstairs, your mom walks in, right?
Opens the door. She didn't walk in yet.
So the gun was loaded already?
Yes.
How many times do you shoot her?
I would say 5, 7 times.
Where do you shoot her at? What part of the body?
And then the torso and chest.
All right, and then your father hears the shots and he comes up?
Yes, and then it was his back.
His back?
Yeah.
All right, and then you walk down the steps.
Yeah.
With a gun loaded, and you go in the kitchen.
Yeah, and then the rest.
How many times do you shoot your sister?
3 times.
Where do you shoot her at?
Well, she was sitting down, so it was kind of chest and head region.
And who's the other person you shot?
Grandmother.
Mary?
Grandmother.
Yeah, chest region.
Chest region?
Yeah.
How many times did you shoot her?
4 times, I believe.
4 times.
And I know, because I had the things in my ears, it was muffled, but, it was also because I wasn't there fully.
When you were loading the mags and when you were doing this, there was...
Yeah, I was, questioning it, but I just, couldn't stop. It was, something subconsciously, I had to do it.
Did you feel anger?
At certain moments, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
You said something before, and I want to make sure I
What?
remember it correctly to ask you about it.
Hmm.
You said something about you weren't really mentally there? Something?
No, when everything was going down,
Okay.
everything was happening, it felt like I was watching it, it felt like I was, further back in my mind. I felt I could still see it, and I knew I was doing it, it just felt like it wasn't me.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yet you knew what you were doing.
Yeah.
You know what time this happened at, right? You remember the time?
It was around 12, because it was
it was before the actual New Year, right?
Ultra.
So it was around, 11:30, 12, around there?
I would say 11:58, 59. I don't know.
Did you do that on purpose?
What? I was thinking around that time.
Happy New Year?
Yeah.
Type of?
Yeah.
What time did you think of doing this at? Or did you? How long have you been planning
I don't
this?
know. But mainly a day. I just saw
were you thinking about it all day today?
Yeah, pretty much.
Now that you've seen much of the police interview, let's get to the aftermath. So almost 4.5 years later, in February of 2022, Scott Kologi's trial took place. To sum it up, the defense argued that Scott was insane and because of his mental issues, couldn't be held entirely responsible. Meanwhile, the prosecution argued that Scott was fully aware of what he was doing and certainly knew right from wrong. In fact, Scott himself had even admitted to feeling nervous as he was loading the murder weapon. And ultimately, the prosecution had made the more convincing argument. So within only 5 hours, Scott Kologi was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of a second-degree weapons charge, and he was given 150 years in prison. Monmouth County Assistant Prosecutor Sean Brennan is quoted as saying these were acts of evil carried out by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He killed them because he could. He killed them because he wanted to. I'd like to say what happened to the Kologi family and Mary Scholes was absolutely heartbreaking. Nobody deserves to be brutally killed in their own home for no reason, especially good people. Every one of the individuals that died in this case was a notably good person. And this was so evidently true that when neighbors and friends came out to describe them all, they were able to talk about all the good things that each person had done in extremely vivid detail. So yeah, that just makes it absolutely heartbreaking. But with that in mind, rest in peace to all 4 of them: Linda Kologi, Stephen Kologi, Brittany Kologi, and Mary Scholes. But anyways, thank you for watching this episode of High Time Crime. If true crime is your thing, then please subscribe and hit the like button because that's all we do. I also have a second account with my brother named Horrifying where we tell stories about everything paranormal. This includes true crime, mysteries, and things that are just downright spooky. I'd greatly appreciate if you subscribed to that too. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, friend.